The morning sunlight rippled across the surface of the lake, casting golden shimmers through the tall pine trees that framed the shoreline. Marcus Bennett stood barefoot on the stone patio of his mansion, sipping coffee from a heavy ceramic mug. He had worked most of his life to earn this view. The calm water, the sprawling yard, the silence that felt almost sacred. 2 months into owning the property, he still hadn't grown tired of waking up early just to watch the mist lift from the water. It was everything he had wanted when he decided to leave the city. Peace, privacy, space. But peace had a short shelf life in Lakeview. Marcus had already noticed the sideways glances at HOA meetings, the whispered comments about his remodel, the subtle digs about how his modern aesthetic didn't quite fit with the neighborhood's colonial and craftsman homes. He wasn't oblivious. He was one of the few black homeowners in the community, and that alone seemed to rankle certain people. Still, he thought he could weather it. His philosophy had always been simple: keep to himself, mind his business, and let the deed in his name speak louder than any neighbor's opinion. That morning he finished his coffee and stretched, ready to enjoy a day with no interruptions. He had just started setting up his fished car appeared. A white SUV rolled slowly down the quiet street, pulling into his long driveway. Marcus frowned, thinking it might be a delivery, though he wasn't expecting anything. The driver's door opened. He didn't recognize stepped out, waving cheerfully as if she belonged. "Excuse me," Marcus called out. "Can I help you?" "Vo, we're just early," the woman shouted back, already unloading a folding chair from her trunk. Marcus blinked. "Early for what?" The woman didn't answer. She just set her chair down on the lawn as though staking a claim, then went back for a cooler. Moments later, more cars arrived, a minivan, then 2 sedans, then another SUV. Within 10 minutes, half a dozen vehicles lined his driveway and curb. Doors slammed shut, laughter echoed. The quiet lakeside morning evaporated beneath the sound of chatter and the thud of car trunks slamming. People never seen before walked across his grass carrying coolers, portable speakers, beach towels, and armfuls of paper plates. Someone even rolled out a collapsible grill, dragging it toward the backyard. Marcus set his fishing rod down carefully and started back up the yard, his pulse quickening. By the time he reached the patio, his jaw had gone slack. A flood of people, 40, maybe 50 at first, streamed across his lawn like it was a public park. Kids darted toward the pool, squealing with excitement. Adults dropped their gear and immediately started setting up as though it were some kind of festival. "Hey," Marcus shouted. His voice carried, but no one seemed to care. "What the hell are you doing? This is my property." A familiar voice cut through the noise. Marcus, calm down." He turned toward the driveway, and there she was. Karen Whitmore, the woman who had made herself the de facto president of the HOA, though the title didn't exist. She always carried herself like royalty. Today was no exception. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, and carried a clipboard like it was an extension of her arm. Karen strutted toward him, smiling like a politician greeting constituents. "We decided to host the annual community social here this year. The lake view makes it the perfect spot." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "What are you talking about? No one asked me." "You can't just..." Karen waved her hand dismissively, cutting him off. "Oh, you weren't at the meeting. We figured you'd be fine with it. It's all for the spirit of community, and you're the new guy, so what better way to welcome you?" He stared at her, struggling to process the audacity. "This is my home. My property. You don't get to decide that." "Vo, don't be difficult," Karen said, her smile tightening. "It's just a little gathering. It'll be fun. You might actually meet some neighbors." By then, the little gathering had swelled. Cars kept arriving, spilling more strangers onto his driveway. There must have been 100 people milling around now. Music suddenly blasted from 2 portable speakers set on the patio. The bass rattled his windows. Kids were already splashing in his pool. A man dragged one of his expensive teak loungers across the deck, scraping the wood as though it were nothing. Another man lit up a cigar and leaned against Marcus's French doors, exhaling clouds of smoke directly against the glass. Marcus clenched his fists. "Everyone out, now. This is trespassing." Karen tilted her chin upward, her voice dripping with false patience. "Marcus, you're overreacting. If you call the police, they'll just laugh. This is an HOA event. We all voted for it. And frankly, you should be honored. Do you know how many years we've been waiting for a yard like this? Perfect lake access, a huge pool, wide lawn for games. This is ideal." "Karen," Marcus said slowly, his voice low and firm, "I don't care if the entire state voted. You didn't ask me. And you didn't get permission. That makes every single person here a trespasser." Karen smirked, folding her arms. "Good luck enforcing that. You're outnumbered here, and honestly, if you start raising your voice, you know how it'll look." She leaned closer, lowering her tone just enough so only he could hear. "One call to the police and I'll tell them you're being aggressive. Let's not play into stereotypes." The words landed like a slap. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he pulled his phone in his pocket. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply began taking photos, license plates, faces, kids running in his yard, strangers guzzling beers on his deck, Karen glaring at him with smug confidence. He documental and calm. "What are you doing?" Karen demanded, her voice suddenly sharp. "Collecting evidence," Marcus said evenly. He dialed the police. "Yes, I need officers at my address immediately. I have 100 trespassers on my private property," though the sound wavered. "You're wasting your time. When the cops show up, they'll see it's just a friendly community gathering. They'll take my side." 15 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled through the gate. The crowd quieted for the first time as officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. Karen rushed forward to intercept them, her voice pitched high with urgency. "Thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed. "He's being hostile toward the entire neighborhood. He threatened us just for having a little party. He's—" "Ma'am," one officer interrupted. "Is this your property?" Karen hesitated, blinking behind her sunglasses. "Well, no, technically, but the HO decided." The officer held up a hand. "Then you and everyone else need to pack up and leave." Now, the mood of the crowd soured instantly. People began muttering, gathering their things in angry silence. A few shot Marcus dirty looks as they hauled their coolers back to their cars. Kids whined about leaving the pool. Someone cursed under their breath about uptight new neighbors. Karen's face went crimson. "This is absurd. We don't have the right to enter private property without the owner's consent." The officer said flatly, "If you don't leave immediately, you'll be charged with trespassing." The party broke apart in a storm of slammed doors and screeching tires. The music cut off. The laughter died. Within half an hour, the yard was empty again, except for a few discarded cups and wet footprints around the pool. Karen lingered near her car, her composure cracking. Marcus stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her. She adjusted her hat, lifted her chin, and sneered. "This isn't over." Marcus's gaze was steady, his voice calm. "You're right," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "It's only just beginning." Then he turned and walked back inside, the faint sound of her engine revving behind him. His lake was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not peace. Not tranquility. Something colder, something sharper. It felt like the calm before a storm. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. The wide room was packed to capacity, its heavy wooden benches groaning under the weight of nearly 100 people. All of them defendants. The hum of nervous whispers filled the air, punctuated now and then by the shuffle of papers or the sharp cough of someone trying to clear the tension from their throat. At the front, beneath the state seal and the solemn gaze of the judge, the case that had rocked Lakeview was about to be heard. Marcus Bennett sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, his navy suit pressed, his tie straight. He looked every bit the professional he was, composed and deliberate. He wasn't here to gloat, he was here to win. His lawyer sat beside him, flipping through a binder thick with evidence, photos, videos, written testimonies. Marcus had documented everything from the day of the invasion. License plates. Faces. Even Karen's smug declaration that he was outnumbered. Across the aisle, the defendants looked less prepared. Some were neighbors he had never even spoken to before the day they swarmed his yard. Now they sat stiff and pale, eyes darting nervously to the judge. Others were visibly angry, glaring at Marcus as though he had wronged them. And then there was Karen Whitmore, perched at the front like a dethroned monarch, her once impeccable confidence unraveling at the seams. Her wide-brimmed hats and sun-kissed bravado were gone. In their place was a tight bun, a suit that looked too expensive for the stress it concealed, and a clipboard clutched like a lifeline. The bailiff's voice rang out. Everyone stood as Judge Ramirez entered. He was a man in his late 50s, his black robe draped over broad shoulders, his gaze sharp behind rimless glasses. He surveyed the room with the kind of look that said he had no patience for theatrics. "Be seated," his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. He glanced at the docket. Case number 24-CV-97, Bennett v. Whitmore et al. Plaintiff alleges unlawful trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress. Seeking damages of $100,000 per defendant. A murmur rippled through the room. Numbers still hadn't sunk in for some of them. $100,000 each. Nearly $10 million in total. Karen shot to her feet. "Your Honor." "Of you may not," Judge Ramirez said without looking up. "You will speak when addressed. Sit down." Karen sat, her face flushing crimson. The judge turned to Marcus. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to make an opening statement?" Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket. His voice was calm, measured, deliberate. "Your Honor, this case is not about a misunderstanding. It's about entitlement." On the afternoon of June 12th, 100 individuals entered my private property without my knowledge, without my consent, and against my express objection. They consumed my resources, used my pool, damaged my deck furniture, and created an atmosphere of intimidation when I asked them to leave. All of this was orchestrated and led by Mrs. Whitmore, who not only encouraged the trespass but threatened to weaponize law enforcement against me if I resisted. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, then continued. I have no issue with community gatherings. I have no issue with my neighbors, but I have every issue with my rights being trampled. Property ownership is not conditional. It is not subject to a popularity vote. The law is clear: trespassing is a violation. And when nearly 100 people feel entitled to your home, your privacy, and your peace, well, that isn't just a nuisance. That's harassment. That's an paused again, scanning the rows of uneasy faces. I am not here to be vindictive. I am here to hold people accountable for choices they made. Choices that caused me financial loss, property damage, and emotional distress. $100,000 per defendant is not about greed. It is about making clear that rights mean nothing if they can be casually ignored. When he sat down, the room was silent except for the scratching of pens on legal pads. Even the air seemed heavier. The defense attorney, a wary man drowning in the impossible task of representing 100 defendants, rose next. His arguments were weak, strained. He claimed the gathering was a miscommunication, a harmless mistake. He said no one intended malice, that it was an annual event gone slightly off course. He even suggested Marcus had overreacted and should have embraced the opportunity to meet his neighbors. Marcus's lawyer responded swiftly, presenting photo after photo, video after video. There were timestamps showing the crowd arriving in waves. Karen barking orders with her clipboard, children in his pool, adults dragging his furniture, and even the girl set up on his patio. There were statements from police officers confirming they had ordered everyone off the property, citing trespassing. There were repair estimates from contractors who had assessed the scratches and damages left behind. And then came the most damning piece of evidence, a recording from Marcus's phone where Karen's voice rang loud and clear. If you call the cops, I'll tell them you're being aggressive. We all voted for this. You're outnumbered here. The sound filled the courtroom. Karen's face drained of color. Some of her co-defendants turned to glare at her as though hearing it for the first time. The judge leaned back in his chair, his lips tightening. When Karen was finally called to testify, she tried to regain her bravado. She claimed the HOA had authority over communal spaces, that Marcus's backyard was an extension of community use. But under cross-examination, her logic unraveled. Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus's attorney, asked, isn't it true that Mr. Bennett's property deed clearly establishes his yard, pool, and home as private property? Karen shifted uncomfortably. Well, yes, technically, but Van, isn't it true that you led more than 90 people onto his property without his permission? Fit was for the community. He wasn't at the meeting. So you, Karen faltered, then stammered. He didn't say no. The attorney's voice cut through. Consent is not assumed, Mrs. Whitmore. Consent is given. And you knew that? By the end of her testimony, Karen was visibly unraveling, her once practiced confidence collapsing under the weight of her own words. The judge didn't deliberate long. After closing arguments, he leaned forward, his voice firm. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. Trespassing is not excused by community tradition. It is not excused by majority vote. It is not excused by the arrogance of one individual who believes they know better than the law. Every defendant named in this case willingly entered private property without permission, participated in unlawful use of that property, and in some cases, caused direct damage. The plaintiff has demonstrated not only the violation of his rights but the coordinated nature of his trespass. The room held its breath. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Bennett. Damages awarded, $100,000 per defendant. Gasps erupted. Some defendants shouted in disbelief. Others sat frozen, faces pale as if they'd been struck. Karen's head dropped into her hands, her body trembling. The weight of the judging was crushing. Not just financially, but socially. The empire she had built with the crumbled in an instant. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, voices shouted questions. Marcus stepped forward, composed as ever. This was never about money, he said calmly. This was about respect. Property rights shall boundaries matter. And today, the court affirmed that no one, no matter how entitled, can trample walk away without consequence. The crowd of reporters buzzed, but Marcus didn't linger. He descended the steps, slid into the back of his waiting car, and left the courthouse behind. That evening, back at his mansion, the lake shimmered with the glow of the setting sun. Marcus sat on his porch with a glass of bourbon, breathing in the clean air. For the first time since he'd moved in, the silence felt pure again. Not the uneasy silence of waiting for the next conflict, but the earned quiet of victory. Karen's reign over the HOA was over. The whispers about whether he belonged in Lakeview were silenced. The lake was his now, truly his, and for once there was no one left to argue otherwise. Do you want me to continue the story into an aftermath arc? How the HOA collapsed, how neighbors treated him differently, maybe even a twist ending with Karen trying to get revenge, or keep it as a clean two-scene courtroom drama?